Dr. Mousavian, hello, good to see you, good to have you here. As you do very well know, now there is hopefully the President-elect Biden is in place in the United States, and perhaps there would be new chances for the US to come back on board on JCPOA and perhaps further negotiations. I've read through your articles, your publications throughout this year, and your quite significant background, having just hands-in experience with the whole issue. How do you see the situation? And to put it very concretely, should someone from Biden's team show up in the next upcoming JCPOA commission, which regularly takes place, what should Iran and now 4+1 do? What should the reaction be, irrespective of all the difficulties that Biden does have right now to get to that point itself?
I think we all understand Biden faces multiple challenges within the U.S. political system, whether this is evangelists group or neocons or radical Republicans or AIPAC or the Israeli lobbies or Saudi lobbies and so on. However, the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, was and is an international obligation of the United States. Biden has already promised that he would rejoin the JCPOA. We understand this is not easy. We are not going to discuss the difficulties about the US side. Just we say we understand the difficulties, the complications. Nevertheless, I believe the first step should be from the US side to rejoin JCPOA in a very clean way, not to put any condition, any precondition for Iran. The only maybe legitimate condition for the US, if raised, would be compliance for compliance. It means if the US is ready for full compliance, Iran also should be ready and would be ready to come back to full implementation of the JCPOA, since we understand Iran in last 2 years, they have distanced some parameters of JCPOA, and Iran is not fully, completely comply with the JCPOA. Therefore, the theory should be compliance for compliance, full compliance for compliance. But the first step should be taken from the US. I believe Biden, when he is in office January 2021, he should issue an executive order for the US to rejoin the nuclear deal JCPOA. And then after official statement of the United States about rejoining the nuclear deal, I believe there should be an immediate meeting between P5+1 and Iran in order to discuss full compliance of all members. Frankly speaking, it is true that the United States withdrew from JCPOA, violated its international obligation. But we should never forget that Europeans also Europeans implemented the nuclear deal completely. And Russians and Chinese and other countries, if they implemented in a very handicapped way. I do not see any other country with full compliance of JCPOA, except Iran, when it was signed in 2015, implemented January 2016. I believe Iran was the only member which fully complied with the JCPOA with zero failure for about 3 years. The US, even during Obama, had failure. Europeans, they had failure. Russians and Chinese, they all had failures. And the failures was because of the primary sanctions of United States.
True.
Because European and other countries, they were very much afraid that if they fully comply, they would be fined by a U.S. court about the primary sanctions. Therefore, to my understanding, what would be needed, first, an official statement by Biden administration about the U.S. rejoining the deal. Second, there should be a P5+1 meeting to discuss how Iran would come back to its full commitments, like the stockpile issue, like the level of enrichment, and other issues. And then to discuss how the U.S. would fully comply with the JCPOA, keeping in mind the main obstacle for full implementation of the JCPOA by United States of America from the first day, even during Obama administration, was the primary sanctions. And then they need to discuss how Europeans, Chinese, and Russians would be committed, how they would guarantee for full implementation of the nuclear deal. This time is an opportunity. This time is an opportunity for Iran to stay very firm that I'm ready to comply fully 100% with zero failure, but the other P5+1 members also, they should be committed for full compliance. And this really needs to be discussed at the meeting of P5+1, maybe at the level of foreign ministers.
That sounds quite reasonable, but I suppose there is another issue we need to discuss. You said quite rightly that Biden needs to issue an executive order for the United States to come back to the JCPOA. At the same time, you rightly mentioned that the US has been in sheer violation of its international obligations. Well, not only as part of its obligations under the nuclear deal, the JCPOA, but also, and more importantly, US has been in violation of its obligations under the mandatory resolution of the United Nations Security Council, namely the 2231. So, the mere fact that Biden says that it has the intention to come back to the JCPOA means that the Biden administration to-be accepts the fact that US has been in violation of its international obligations. And so this violations, even though Iran claims certain compensations or other issues in regard with this duration of violations, shouldn't this be a precondition, a natural precondition for the United States to, first of all, have a plan or propose a plan for the compensation of the time of violation? Second of all, pay in the punitive damages for the violations. Third of all, make sure that it has the capability to ratify the JCPOA this time within the United States constitutive structure. And third of all, make sure that such violations do not take place again. And shouldn't this, in fact, be something that everybody, including the 4+1, needs to expect the United States as a precondition to rejoin the JCPOA?
First of all, I believe Democrats, they all blamed Trump administration for withdrawing the JCPOA. They all officially stated that this is a mistake and the United States should have fully complied with the deal. And they blamed Trump for withdrawing from JCPOA. Now they won the election. Before the election, they said if they win, they would join. They would rejoin the nuclear deal JCPOA. Number one. Number two, I believe the U.S. Violated the deal 100%, 100%. It was a violation of international law and regulations. the UN resolutions, the IAEA resolutions, and moreover. However, the Europeans also, they violated because they never fully complied with the deal. And Russians and Chinese also, they failed for full compliance because of the US sanctions.
True.
Therefore, I would say all 6 members of the JCPOA, they all have violated the deal from the day one with different percentage, from 30% to 100%. This is number 2. Number 3, it would be very, very legitimate if Iran in P5+1 meeting raises the issue of compensation, because when the US withdrew from the nuclear deal and imposed ocean of sanctions, practically damaged Iran with hundreds of billions of dollars, not just some billions. I believe during Trump administration, Iran has suffered and has been damaged by hundreds of billions by Trump because of Trump administration sanctions, which all were completely illegal and illegitimate. Therefore, this would be very legitimate for Iran to raise, okay, you are going to join, perfect, welcome, but what about the compensation, the damages you caused for us for the last 3-4 years? And then that would be legitimate for Iran to ask the same compensation, maybe definitely would be less, about Europeans. Why you did not fully comply? And even from Russians and Chinese, because also they did not fully comply. Therefore, if Iran asks compensation first about the from the US and then the other members, that would be completely legitimate. One. Second, if there would be a discussion between P5+1 and Iran, raised by Iran a question, what guarantee do we need for a sustainable implementation of the nuclear deal? What if tomorrow another president or even Biden decide to withdraw again? Or if a European member decide to withdraw, what would be a guarantee under what circumstances all 7 members, P5+1 and Iran, they can give full guarantee for sustainable, permanent implementation of the nuclear deal?
Yeah, I'm sorry. And what could that be? Let's put it this way. What could that be, in your opinion? What would be feasible as a guarantee?
In my opinion, since on the Iranian side, parliament, government, National Security Council, and the leader, they all signed. That's why the nuclear deal was implemented in perfect way.
Perfect.
I believe the United States would need the same procedure. They would need for a ratification of the Congress. They would need the ratification of National Security Council and the Cabinet. This would be maybe the most realistic guarantee, because this would become a law. This would be, however, never forget, we should never forget, Trump withdrew from the some US international commitments, which was already ratified, passed by the Congress. Therefore, we are not talking about a normal government,
True.
It is not really normal. The US is not normal. However, I reiterate again, that would be very legitimate for Iran to raise these 2 issues, compensation from the US, the Europe, and the other members, because none of them fully comply.
True.
And the main country is responsible and guilty is United States. One. Second, if Iran would ask a type of guarantee from other members that this is not going to happen again, and every member, every signatory would imply completely for permanent. This would be legal. This would be legitimate. But frankly speaking, this would not be realistic on the other side, because Europeans are not going to pay compensation about their failures. Americans, they are not going to pay. Russians and Chinese, they would not pay any compensation because of their failures. They understand they have had failures, but they are not going to pay compensation.
And
Number
also
one.
US, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I said.
Okay.
I said already.
Yeah.
I said the U.S. would not pay compensation.
Okay.
Europeans, they would not pay.
Okay.
And neither European nor Chinese. I mean, I'm talking about realistic.
Yeah, the real politics.
Realistic. The real politics. The realities. They're not going to pay. Therefore, I believe, to be realistic, the first realistic approach and decision would be first for the U.S. to rejoin. Second, for the U.S. and all other 5 members to comply fully. This time, not handicapped. For full implementation. Full compliance for full compliance. Full compliance by Iran, full compliance by the US, full compliance by Europeans, full compliance by Russians and Chinese. No excuse for anybody for any percentage of failure for in implementation of the period. This would be step 2. Step 3, after the deal is fully implemented for a while, this would be really a goodwill by all members. And then this would create confidence building between all members. And you remember the Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, during the nuclear negotiations, he publicly said, if there is a deal, if the US would not cheat, if the US would implement, then we would be ready to discuss the other issue.
True.
It is official statement by the Supreme Leader. Therefore, then again, I believe if the US and all other members of P5+1, signatories of JCPOA, would fully comply, this would really create confidence. This would open the door for negotiating, discussing, cooperating on other issues like terrorism, like crisis in the Middle East, and so. When this door is open, then European, first Americans, then Europeans, and then Russians and Chinese, they should understand they did not fully comply with the JCPOA for 4 or 5 years, and they have to compensate Iran in other issues. Because you are not going to find any European Parliament or the US Congress to pass a law or a bill or a legislation that the US would pay $200 million to Iran. It's not going to happen. But there are many other ways for the US, Europeans, Russians, and Chinese to compensate if the deal is already in full compliance. A minimum amount of confidence is built, and the door for negotiating and cooperating on other issues are opened, and then they should give some more incentives to Iran.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I understand your point. So, but I mean, let's go back to how you are putting it: the full compliance of the JCPOA. And well, in JCPOA itself, as we see in the very, preface to the nuclear deal, we can read that which is basically the chapeau of the whole agreement in place. So the intention of the parties is to mark a fundamental shift in their approach to the issue, means the Iranian nuclear issue, and on top of that, they would like to go forward, that's what is intended, to positively contribute to regional and international peace and security. And I understand that in 2018, you exactly wrote a whole scholarly article on the issue, binding on the building on the Iran nuclear deal for international peace and security. So, isn't it like when we are talking about the full compliance of this deal is to some extent means that United States has to become something other than what it has been in the past 4 years. The past 4 years, who do we know? Again, talking about internal real politics of the United States, the past 4 years, who still has over 70 million supporters inside the society, with all the mechanisms still in place. Whatever the Trump administration did all around the region in the western side of Asia still are in place and are going to still be implemented. So in that sense, what does it exactly, in a more tangible sense, what does it mean that they have to fully comply this? Let's forget about compensation for the time being, to stay true to what you're saying, so that what you envisage, and let me just recite from the conclusion of your article, in which you say the main reason for the 10 years of failure was the inflexible US position, which also includes parts of Obama Democrats, right? Not only at the time of the Trump administration position, which included a maximalist demand for zero enrichment, zero centrifuge, zero plutonium, with a refusal to acknowledge Iran's right to enrichment under the NPT. And then you basically rightly quote Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel, that basically demanded exactly the same thing in 2014 and published in Jerusalem Post. So with such a situation being in place, when you are saying let them all come back and fully, in the way that even before, because you truly acknowledge that even before Trump's administration, none of these parties were complying with honesty and good faith to their obligations. So now this coming back, and what would be, let's put it this way, what would be the threshold that you think of compliance that we can say, okay, right now, considering the reality on the ground, that we can call a faithful, complete compliance of the deal?
I believe the P5+1 meeting, negotiating about full compliance, rejoining the US and full compliance by Iran and all other members. In order, again, to be realistic, they would need a phased approach. They would need a step-by-step plan. They cannot do it immediately, considering the many US laws, regulations, executive orders, and so on, so on, so on. Second, they need, again, to be first focused on the JCPOA, the implementation of the JCPOA. Third, the first step would be for the US to come back to situation 2016. The US to come back to situation 2016. What does mean this situation? What we saw in 2016. In 2016, the US was complying with every commitment within the nuclear deal about 50%, not 100%, because of the primary sanctions. And Europeans, maybe they were also implementing 50 or 60 or 70%, not 100%. Therefore, the first realistic step would be for Biden administration to come back to the situation of 2016, the status quo of 2016. Second, the second phase, the second step would be to negotiate, to discuss how they can remove the obstacles for full implementation of the JCPOA, which would go back to US primary sanctions.
True.
Here, the Biden administration should be open to negotiate about suspension of every US primary sanctions, which is in contradiction with the full implementation of the JCPOA.
Okay, I see.
And then, when the US is going to accept in the second step or the second phase to suspend every legislation, executive order, or primary sanctions, which is in contradiction with the full implementation of the JCPOA, then Europeans would and should not have any excuse for full implementation of the deal. These two steps are the most legal, legitimate, realistic steps I can propose, I can suggest for Biden coming to administration, to White House from January, and it may take about 4 or 5 months of negotiation and agreement to come to final conclusion.
Okay, perfect. So you are talking, I think, well, when you say the status quo as existed in 2016 needs to come back, to resurface, I suppose it entails all the situation that you're also rightly describing. But now, when you are talking about, let's go back to 2016, the situation in 2016 was not only about the JCPOA itself, but there are surrounding issues. And I suppose one of the most important one was the kind of relationship at the time the United States had with the Saudi Kingdom. It's very interesting that the Mohammad Javad Zarif, the foreign minister of Iran, wrote in 2016, September 2016, in New York Times, an opinion which is entitled, "Let us rid the world of Wahhabism." So the dialogue at the time was how to dismantle Wahhabism, which the evil fruits of which we can see right now in just right beside me in the country. I'm in Switzerland, just right in France. We can see the beheading and all the kind of catastrophic kind of events that have their roots in Wahhabism. At the time, the world seemed like being ready to get rid of Wahhabism so that on a day like this, we wouldn't have perhaps the kind of tragedies we see in France or elsewhere in Europe committed by those who basically give milk to Al-Nusra, ISIS, and etc., etc., the people, the kind of folks that everybody knows about. So, in order to go back to that situation, perhaps Biden also needs to really dismantle so many of the deals and so many of the kind of different relations that the Trump administration made with the Saudi Kingdom, especially in terms of arms trade. And if should that happen, let's go back to technicality. Let's put aside all personal or national feelings and patriotism and everything. Wouldn't that somehow, from the legalistic point of view, mean again another breach of U.S. contract or U.S. obligations, although it's a pernicious one? I mean, as much as a new Trump administration came and kicked JCPOA, so now we expect, or we would like to see, Biden come and kick another legally binding agreement with the Saudi Kingdom, however a pernicious one, and I suppose needs to be kicked away. But then at the end of the day, we are dealing with an entity which called the United States, which we have to expect any new administration coming in place is going to abrogate and violate a set of its international binding agreements, right?
Yes, however, I always like to be realistic. I mean, this is really ideal if the U.S. would a day be a country not to support dictators in the Middle East, not to go for wars like attacking Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and all these countries, not to support terrorism or Wahhabism, and so this would be ideal. But I want to again be realistic. I believe the most realistic approach for Biden administration on relations with Iran would be first to stop other countries' interference in foreign policy of the United States. If the U.S. wants to have strategic relations with Israel or Bahrain or Emirate or Saudi Arabia, that's fine. That's fine. But the U.S. should not let Riyadh or Tel Aviv or Abu Dhabi to interfere, to decide about U.S.-Iran relations.
I see.
I think the most important issue, which would be really in the national interest of Americans, to stop foreign interference, determining the U.S. policy in the Middle East, to make a distinction between U.S. good relation with Saudi Arabia or Bahrain or Emirate or Israel with the U.S. policy of supporting JCPOA or engagement with Iran. This is number two. Number three, I believe Obama was for a more balanced situation between Israelis and Palestinians. He was after two-state solutions, but Trump stopped and gave every carte blanche to Israelis and practically destroyed the two-state solutions. And whatever Israelis they wanted, Trump gave them.
Okay.
And that's why at the end of Trump, Netanyahu appreciated Trump and he said, whatever you wanted, you gave us. Biden should stop. Biden should stop carte blanche to Israelis for every aggression and violation in this region. And then I believe Obama was in a position to support a type of regional cooperation system in the Persian Gulf to decrease tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, to bring the confrontations in this region to cooperation. That's why he said to Atlantic in 2016, he said to the Atlantic that Saudi Arabia should share the region with Iran. No other U.S. president has ever made such a statement. He said, we are not going to be free riders anymore to Saudis, and Saudis should share the region with Iran. I believe this would be really the best strategy for Biden. Rather than fueling the confrontation and animosities and hostilities in this region, like what Trump did between Iran, Saudi, on Yemen, on Iraq, on every other issue, on Lebanon and so, I believe this would be the best strategy for Biden to support a regional cooperation system in the Persian Gulf, which would convert confrontations to engagement and cooperation, which would include Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and other neighbors, Arab neighbors in the Persian Gulf.
Okay, I see. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like, let's hope that Biden does have the capacity in considering all the facts within the U.S. general government and, I mean, the whole political system in the United States regime, if any of such things could be possible. No, that is very interesting. Now, it's just it might be interesting for to finish up this interesting dialogue. Remembering a piece written in 2010 by Robert Mnuchin. Perhaps you do know the gentleman, known as the negotiation guru at Harvard Law School, in which he talks about bargaining with the devil. And he describes what devil is. The devil would be an adversary who has intentionally harmed you in the past or appears willing to harm you in the future. In short, someone who is not trustworthy. And I suppose Mr. Mnuchin right now very much agrees that from 2016 to 2020, at the very least, the world faced the total devil that Islamic Republic of Iran has been pointing finger to for the past 42 years. So let's see if bargaining with the devil, according to Robert Mnuchin, would work, and if President-elect Biden is going to be less of a devil and be able to cope with the devil that exists right there in the United States. Dr. Mousavian, thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you very much.